Thank you everybody for coming and being here today. We're here for 2 days together for the workshop which I named How to Create Your Space of Love. The course will be very varied and we'll have practical exercises. I brought color pencils for us to start drawing the plans of your family domains. We'll have a rattle exercise. Everybody will have a percussion instrument, and we'll use percussion as a model for creation of a community. We'll see what makes a good orchestra and what makes a bad orchestra, and how to avoid conflicts, and how to make sure that your orchestra, your community, should you want to create one, functions smoothly. This course is very much practice-oriented, because for me the basic message of the Ringing Cedars series is not just the appreciation of our spiritual essence, but also the very practical steps that we can all make to turn this spiritual understanding into physical reality. If you remember in the books, it suggests that we need to be paying equal attention to the spiritual dimension of family domains and our journey on this earth, as well as to the material realm. And if we neglect one or the other, we look like a lame person, because we live in the physical world, and inspiration is essential for anything we create, but at the same time, some pragmatic tools would not hurt. I got my first degree in international economics, and I also went through business training and got training in project management. What I discovered, that apart from the inspiration that came from reading of the Ringing Cedars series, it was very, very important to have some hardcore pragmatic approach to proceed without unnecessary mistake in integrating the knowledge and information from the books into your real life. I had been preparing myself for a career in business. My first degree was in economics, and I speak fluently 2 foreign languages, English and French. So I was hoping to make a career in a large international company. And my wife's degree was in international banking and investment management. So we were preparing ourselves for very, very different lives, and we were thinking we would not have children until the age of 30, so that we have time to enjoy life and go to resorts and make a lot of money and have fun. Well, I'm 31 now, and we already have 2 children. One is 7, Lada. Some of you know her through the books too. And the other one is another daughter, 18 months of age and more on the way. So very positive changes that took place in my life created in me a lot of desire to share these messages with people in the English-speaking world. And it turned out that at the time I read the books, there was no good translation of the Ringing Cedars series available. And through different circumstances, I was able to approach the author Vladimir Megre. I was granted permission to translate the books and make them available in the English language. And so for the past 4 years, I was involved in translating and publishing the books in the English-speaking world. At the same time, I spent a lot of time in Russia, and I joined one of the first Russian eco-villages that sprouted after the Ringing Cedars series got published in the regional Russian language. So I have a plot of land in one of the Russian eco-villages, and 3 years ago I was elected the coordinator of the eco-village. So I was involved in planning, resolving the problems connected with setting up of family domains and creating a community. So I have a lot of hands-on experience of living in a family domain and helping others to create one. And I've observed many success stories, many failures, which I would like to share with you during these 2 days, so that instead of repeating others' mistake, you can start making your own. anything that you start doing to integrate these beautiful messages in your life is likely to create problems. So what we can do is not to avoid problems, because problems and challenges is what makes life interesting, but we can learn some pragmatic steps that we can all have in mind to manage these problems and conflicts and challenges successfully. Let us talk about what constitutes a space of love, what constitutes a family domain, and just why these two concepts are so important and are central in the Ringing Cedars series, and only resonate so deeply with people, not just in Russia, but all over the world. Even though my course is called How to Create a Space of Love, I must confess from the very beginning that I do not know how to. And even if I did, I would not tell you. For one simple reason. Remember, Anastasia was refusing to provide Vladimir Megre with a detailed blueprint how to proceed with creation of a family domain and your space of love. And there was a very good explanation for this. Creating a space of love, setting up your family domain, is really a creative project. And the process, the creative process of starting it, finding your land, starting planting living things on this land, building your house, if it applies to your situation, giving birth to your children in this new space, it's really so uniquely yours that no two domains will be alike. No two spaces of love will ever be alike. And the result, the family domain, is just as important as the creative process of doing it. For this reason, I cannot teach you, like in a school situation, the instructor is presumably the one who knows everything and the students are the ones who know nothing. In this situation, this does not apply. Nobody but you will know how to create your particular space, how to create your domain or your community if you decide to create a community. So the only thing I can do is to share some of my suggestions on the generic pattern to follow, discuss what I think is the pragmatic approach to doing it, discuss what Anastasia said about creating a family domain and a space of love, and then to allow you to apply all these tools in your life to fit your specific situation. There are two kinds of learning, two very basic kinds of learning. We'll discuss them more when we will be talking about education and child rearing. But basically, we have instruction, formal instruction that we have in normal schools and in universities and colleges, and we have apprenticeship. Now, the formal instruction is when there is an individual who teaches you, and you are trying to absorb information from this individual. And this is really learning through the mind, whereas there is a different route. Until not too long ago, all the crafts, all the skills important in life, including agriculture, were passed on from one generation to the next, not through formal instruction or schooling. It was passed on through apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is very different from formal instruction in it being learning by experience. You observe the person who knows and is skillful in something, and you pick up not intellectually but intuitively by doing it along the person who does it well. Even though in the format of this course I have to stand up in front of you and give presentations, and we have only limited possibility for interaction, I would like it as much as possible to be apprenticeship. You're learning from experience of myself and other people who started turning their dreams into reality, as opposed to instruction. Again, I do not have any ready-made answers that would apply to all the situations, and these answers do not even exist. We usually think that we can learn more from humans than from any other sources. This is why we like reading books, coming to workshops, and looking for information within our human realm. However, one of the strong messages of the Ringing Cedars series is that we can equally learn directly from nature. We can connect to the source information in nature, and we can learn as much from observation of nature as we can from our human peers. For example, if you have a question on when to fertilize your garden, should you do it at the end of the growing season, at the beginning of the growing season, during the growing season? If you open agronomy books, you will sometimes find contradictory recommendations. So how to proceed about it? Well, for myself, I made the conclusion that I can learn at least as much from observing the natural cycle. And in nature, in the northern hemisphere, it teaches me that nature fertilizes the earth and the gardens in the autumn, when the leaves fall from the ground and provide nutrients and provide organic material for worms and bacteria in the soil to enrich the next year's cycle. This is just one small example how nature and not books can teach us and give us direct answers by example to the questions that we might have. So I encourage you, when you are confronted with a big problem in your life, try to look not just at human experience, but also at how things work in nature. And it will oftentimes provide you with the answers you are seeking. Then there is no universally right or universally wrong way to approach the creation of a family domain and approach the creation of your space of love. Again, for the same exact reason that this is your unique project. It will really be your unique space, and nobody except you will be able to create one and make sure that it nourishes your body and your spirit. So I will not be providing any right answer. I will only be offering some insights on how to avoid mistakes and how to make sure that you progress in your journey without unnecessary hindrances. Many people believe, after reading the Ringing Cedars series, that pragmatic approach to integrating material from the books into real life, the pragmatic approach for turning your dream into reality is not really necessary. They believe that since Anastasia has this extremely powerful thought that can turn thinking and words into reality, we can all follow her example, and instead of taking pragmatic steps, just rely on our inspiration alone. I'll give you several examples of it, some of which I'm sure you will find either entertaining or shocking, just in 1 minute. I'm mindful, though, of the very important message in the series that the spiritual realm and the material realm are equally important. Many of us probably have seen in our lives people who are so absorbed by spirituality that they cannot manage their lives in this material, real world efficiently. I'm sometimes so absorbed in the mental realm that I forget where my glasses are or where my watch is. So, but we really need to be present both there and here to be holistic human beings. So creation of your space of love requires as much inspiration as it requires pragmatic thinking and consideration. And Anastasia also talks about the importance of thinking everything through before you start implementing it in physical reality, because thought really is the foundation of all. And unless you create a clear image of what you want to achieve, achieving it will be extremely difficult. In Russian, we have a very good fairy tale where the hero is confronted with very difficult tasks, like going to a foreign country and bringing a bird made of gold, or going to the underwater world and bringing some treasures from the depth of the sea. but these challenges were nothing compared with the greatest challenge of going not knowing where and bringing not knowing what. You know, many times we do not achieve our goals not because we do not know how to make the pragmatic steps, it is because we do not know where we are going. And I've already seen examples of many eco-village groups, people who were inspired by Anastasia's ideas, who are proceeding with creation of a community without giving too much thought as to what they want to achieve. And we will be discussing how to avoid these very common mistakes. Many people believe, after reading the books, that once they join a group of people who have read Anastasia, all people will be like one big happy family. There will be no conflicts. Everybody will be getting along well with each other. It will really be one big loving family. My understanding of Anastasia's intent, though, is to see a union of happy families. Each family will preserve their individuality, preserve their space, have their own domain, but will be surrounded by a neighborhood of co-minded families, co-minded people with whom to share their experience, learn from, and enjoy a rich social as well as natural environment. So I see the creation of a family domain, and especially creation of a community based on Anastasia's ideas, as really a union of opposites. We will see with you from the percussion exercise that if everybody had the same exact rattle and were making the same exact rhythm, then the orchestra would not be of any interest because everybody would be the same. If we all were the same, produced on the same pattern, like molded mugs bought in any large store, there would not be a need in the community because you could get all your life experience from yourself and from your family. But what makes creation of the community interesting is exactly the fact that people are different and they're able to introduce into the creation of a family domain some very unique perspectives, diversity. And this is what makes the Anastasia concept of community so far superior to creating your standalone family domain. It will provide the union of opposites. What is the upshot of it? In the eco-village where I have our plot of land in Russia, there are some people who seriously believe it should be one big family. And this attitude alone already brews conflict. Because when you don't want to love somebody and then insist on you loving them, the natural reaction is repulsion. We have several people in the community who, instead of tending their gardens, spend their time policing gardens of other settlers. They would come to a fence line and look over the fence and see whether you've stuck the seed into your mouth before planting it. And if you have not, beware. Somebody will be shouting to you from across the fence, "Hey, Anastasia told you how to plant the seeds. Why don't you follow Anastasia's advice?" Why these people, and this is real life stories, while these people usually neglect planting their gardens, they're so absorbed into making sure that all others in the community follow Anastasia's advice to the letter. There are many more examples like that right from my experience. Some people believe that they need to provide entertainment to everybody. So 11 o'clock at night, somebody's knocking at your door. You open the door, and there are the activists of the community with drums and rattles and fiddles trying to make some music and noise to entertain you, waking up your children who start crying, disturbing your family evening together. So, you know, no respect of private space because they feel that if everybody is happy, everybody is joyous, it will be good for the whole community. So they're putting into their 2 cents worth in making everybody happy. So I've seen that this intention to create one big family is not just realistic because all people are different And in a community, you will have people of different backgrounds, different ages, different inclinations. And there is no way I can be interested in interacting with all 100 families in our community. I have other families who I get very well along with. I would rather spend my time with them rather than communing with somebody I don't have too much interest in. So instead of a big one family, I really see creation of a community as a creation of a union of independent families. And the way I see it is you can have a strong, beautiful community based on networks. For example, if we have 50 people in a community or 50 families, like here in this room, if I get along well, if I enjoy dealing with 20 people only or 20 families only, this will already provide me with more social time, more interaction, more support, and more rich experience of getting to know other families and other people than what is normally available in any urban environment, where our relationships are much more pragmatic and much better structured. So networks. I will be getting along well with 20 families. Somebody will be getting along with 20 other families. Some of these networks will overlap. There might be one family that's getting along with and enjoys interacting with all other families in the community, which is fine. But I would not expect everybody to join into one big family. Actually, there are some communities who have a strong leader who requires from the whole community adherence to certain norms. For example, every morning at 8 o'clock, everybody needs to come to the community center for a joint meditation. But what if I am not inclined this particular morning to come and join into a meditation, etc., etc.? So, this is why Anastasia's concept is so different from many of the communes or intentional communities. It is not one big family, it is a union of independent families living in their independent family domains. And as we seek the union of opposites, the most important thing is not to make everybody similar, but rather to promote tolerance for others. If you see your neighbor planting cucumbers in a way different from the way Anastasia prescribed, well, why not be tolerant to this neighbor's approach as long as it is not encroaching on your freedom and on your domain? So I would encourage you to respect diversity, to respect different inclinations and interests of all people you might be dealing with during the creation of your community, and see it as a union of families and individuals rather than one big family. A space of love in a very direct sense is an invisible space. A space of love is not the same thing as your family domain. Theoretically, you can even live in your city apartment and create a magnificent space of love right there in your apartment. I've seen some people who went very pragmatically about creating their family domain, and in a space of a couple of years, they've created outwardly all the trappings of the family domain described in the books. They've got themselves a piece of land, planted a hedge, a living fence, started a garden, built a home, dug a pond, gave birth to children even in this family domain. There is a very good and nice-looking family domain, but there is no space of love within this family domain. One family I know has created this family domain, but the husband commutes to the city every morning to work in the city, and he has a very stressful job, works 12 hours a day, with only one day off a week, and he has no mental space and mental energy left to do something creative in the space of his family domain. So his wife is complaining that he's providing the monetary income that is necessary for setting up the domain, but he rarely sees his own family. So, important thing to remember that what matters most is not just the planting of a tree. What matters most is your inner experience and your inner space. And this is what creates and makes the space of love. And a family domain is an ideal medium for promoting this space, imbuing the space around you with your energies. But we need to be mindful that it's not a goal in itself. It's just the environment to help you arrive at this inner experience. So be mindful of whether what you are doing you enjoy doing. For example, if you buy a very expensive piece of land to create your family domain, and you spend another 30 years of your life working very hard in a city to pay off mortgage on the piece of land you've purchased for your family domain, chances are you won't have any energy and any time and any inspiration left to start creating something there of value, because it was all be absorbed by your money-making activity. So just we need to strike a balance between having the physical family domain but also turning it into a space of love. A family domain is really an extension of ourselves. What we have inside, we are able to demonstrate with the help of the living creatures, living plants that we put into the soil in our living space of love. This is why no two people's family domains will be similar, and everybody's plot will be unique. Everybody's space will be unique. And what you create will be to a very high degree an expression of yourself. And you will be able to see the consequences of your actions right before your eyes. As we already discussed, Anastasia refused to provide a detailed description, a detailed blueprint, step by step, of each small step you need to make to create your family domain. She did not say which exactly species of plants to plant, when to plant them, how to arrange all the plantings around your dwelling. For the same reason, it is your creative process, and you will be able to express your inner substance in the living space that you are creating. That said, Anastasia has provided some very, very important pragmatic approaches to starting thinking about the integration of the family domain concept into your lives. So many people proceed on the inspiration without taking care to follow some pragmatic steps, and it creates problems and delays the project a lot. But the way I see it, it happens many times because people have not taken care to even think through the messages in the books and think through what they are planning to do before actually doing it. At the Sydney public talk a few days ago, there was a lady who read the books and was so inspired, she sold her house in Sydney and moved to one of the existing Australian eco-villages only to discover that something did not work with the existing community. So she came back from this eco-village a few weeks later, all frustrated, and really torn apart and blaming Anastasia and the books for this life experience. But as we discuss now, the steps that are outlined right there in the books, we will probably be able to judge whether when something happens in our life, we need to blame somebody else, or we need to find out the reason for these failures within our own approaches. So what are the 4 steps that I described in co-creation for creating your family domain and proceeding to establishing a space of love? Very simple steps that many people neglect. They are, first step, find an ideal location on the earth for your family domain. The second step, take 1 hectare or so of land in this location which you prefer to all others. The third step is to plant or to build a fence And the fourth step is to proceed to building a home, planting a garden, and if it applies to you, giving birth to your children within the space of your family domain. So these four very simple steps in this progression. And I outlined them on page 5 of your handout. Let's take a look at these four very important phases. And you will not believe how many people who are even inspired to start creating their family domain actually neglect these steps or this logical progression. Remember when Vladimir Megre tried to organize an association of pure-minded entrepreneurs before publishing the books, he was hitting the wall all the time because when the ideas were not yet available to the public, it was extremely hard to bring people together when there was no ideological basis of them coming together. Likewise with the creation of the family domain, the first step really is to find the place where you will be creating it. And make sure, as suggested in the books, that you prefer this place to all other places on the earth, that you are ready to spend there all your life, that you would like to see your children spending their life in the space of this particular family domain on this specific place of ground, and which has a favorable climate for you. Extremely important first step. Many people just come, they see a piece of land, they buy it without taking care to determine whether this is really your home place, your motherland, whether this is the piece of land where you feel something special, where you can envision yourself spending all your life rather than spending a short vacation. To give you an example, there are so many beautiful places on the earth, but not many of them will probably match your interest in creating a permanent family domain. I spent some time living in Hawaii, and oh boy, it's beautiful. There are parts of Maui that are still so agricultural and so remote and so undeveloped, they do not even have grid electricity. It's beautiful, but I would not envision it as a place for my family domain because I can't envision myself separate from my culture in a different country, creating my space of love for myself and for my children, because it's good for a 2-week tropical vacation, or it's good to be there for some period of time. But again, creation of a family domain is quite different from going to a resort. You need to find a place that appeals to you to the extent that you would like to spend your whole life there in this space. Then, do you want your children to spend their life and to live out their lives there in the same family domain? Well, another important consideration, there are very many different places that appeal to me in America. They have beautiful nature and the change of seasons that is lacking in tropical environment. But, and I would readily spend my life there. But when I think whether I can envision my children living out their lives in this family domain in America, for example, the answer is no, I can't envision this because I understand they will become American and will lose their Russian roots, which, as we will discuss later, I feel are so important, your cultural roots coming from your specific tradition. So make sure that the place you select really appeals both to you and has this intergenerational attraction. And finally, it does have to have a favorable climate for you. Now, what this means is you cannot really decide on a place before you live there at least for 1 full year to see what climate it has, what weather changes it had, to make sure that it's not just attractive to you during the springtime when everything is blooming and birds are singing, to make sure that both during the winter and summer and the fall and the spring, it is a place where you want to be. When we purchased a piece of land in an eco-village where we now have our homestead in Russia, We didn't follow this step. Well, it was a nice place. I'm not sure whether we preferred it to all others, but there was already a community going underway, so we decided to join. We did not really evaluate whether the climate would be favorable for us, because we proceeded on the assumption that since it was just 100 kilometers away from the place where we lived, it would have similar weather and similar climate. Wrong. Just 100 kilometers. But the climate and weather and wind patterns and the moisture in the air were so different that our bodies had trouble to adapt to it. My wife was constantly getting colds because of the wind and higher moisture in the air. So, you know, the fact that you are creating and starting to establish something that is to last for more than even one generation, you need to make sure that the place is right for you and for your family. And this is the very basic first step. Why is it important to create a permanent space of love, a permanent family domain, rather than creating a farm here and living here for some time and letting your children go elsewhere and start their own family domain elsewhere? Well, several reasons for that. The very pragmatic reason is that nature is really unique in every place. For this reason, the knowledge of local soil, local weather conditions is really unique to one specific location on the earth. I had gardening experience at my parents' garden near Moscow, dacha garden, since the age I was 5. And I was amazed to see that much of my gardening experience and skills did not apply to working the soil of my family domain, which was less than 200 kilometers away from my parents' garden. Just 200 kilometers, but weather patterns were already different, and soils were different enough to force me start learning from scratch. And you know, because we want to create a space that would be self-sustaining and what we would call permaculture, that would require the minimum amount of our labor and would produce everything to nurture the whole family, we can only achieve it by having an intimate knowledge of this specific piece of land. And this can only be achieved by preserving the intergenerational continuity. Remember how it was described in the books that, in Rights of Love especially, that parents were taking care to take notes of weather patterns, to record their weather conditions, to make sure that they pass on this and other observations and the knowledge of how to live and how to cultivate your particular soil in your family domain on to future generations. So because this knowledge is accumulated over the course of generations, it's very important to have a family domain rooted in one space rather than being transferred from one place to another with each generation. Also because the process of selecting your family domain may take so much time, more than a year, maybe it will take several years. Ideally, you would not want your children to spend part of their life just searching and searching and searching for this space if they can avoid it by already being in a space that has been created with love for them, where their parents with themselves planted the trees and flowers, and when they know every blade of grass. Then our bodies, like bodies of all organisms, adapt to our natural environment. And when you are rooted in one place for a very long period of time, especially intergenerationally, you make sure that you achieve the highest adaptation to your local conditions. We humans are one of the unique, if not the only organism on planet Earth who now consumes food that is brought from all over the world and doesn't necessarily come from your immediate natural surroundings. To the extent that part of your body, part of the physical material that will become your body a month from now, is now probably in Europe, in a dairy. and another one is hanging on a tree in Latin America. And the third part of your body is now being tracked from across Australia into your grocery store. You know, in a very direct sense, we are scattered all over the globe. And we are scattered all over the time-space. All other creatures, they eat local food only, and they eat seasonal food only, what's provided by nature in each season. And it creates this flow of nourishment from them to the environment and back, and promotes this natural balancing, health-giving mechanism that you read about in the Ringing Cedars series. Now, the reason why humans on average are less healthy than wild animals is because our bodies do not even belong where we live. They're completely disconnected from your local landscape because your food was coming from all over the world, and because you are eating food today that was probably harvested or produced 6 months ago when there was a complete different season. So in nature, nature provides food in the season when it needs to be consumed, as you read in the Ringing Cedars series. So in the summertime, you need to eat fruit that was produced in the summertime, or tubers that can be stored over the year after the growing season. So really, you know, when you start creating a family domain and you planting your own garden, you start this process of returning home, returning to the land and making sure that you are connected to the place and you are rooted in the place where you and your family live. The second step, after you found this ideal location, and I know in Australia or in America or in other countries that have the settlement history, this might be a greater challenge than for Russians who have their motherland where their ancestors lived for thousands of years. I know it's a greater challenge, but still, take care to follow this first step and take your time to make sure that the place you find really feels home. And it might not even be here in Australia. I know that some people feel moved to go back to Europe where their ancestors came from and to see whether they might feel more at home in Norway or Holland or England or Germany. If you do not feel that it's really your motherland here, you might explore the land of your ancestors, and we'll talk more about just why this connection to your tradition might be important. Okay, let's imagine you found this magical piece of land that you want to turn into your space of love for generations to come. And when you want to be born again in a few generations' time, then the next step that many people do not even follow is to take 1 hectare of land there forever. In this advice of Anastasia's, we have 2 very important components: the size of the plot and the fact that it needs to be taken for an indefinite period of time. So why is the size of the plot important? Why not go ahead and secure yourself a 1,000-acre family domain? Well, because you will not be able to create the space of love because it will not be on your human scale. When you have a smaller, definite family domain, not only you can have more of a community around you. If every family has 1,000 acres, it will be a short drive to your nearest neighbor. So it will be very difficult to create a strong community. And also, you will not know all the plants on your plot of land. If you have 1,000 acres, there will probably be places which you will never even have a chance to explore. Whereas when you limit it to a manageable amount of land, you will be able to know in great detail each blade of grass, each plant, each tree, and it will become part of you, and you will become part of this space and this natural environment. Some communities proceed without giving a land title to each individual family. I feel, however, that taking a piece of land forever really means that you need to follow some pragmatic legal steps and apply existing legal laws to secure land for yourself in perpetuity. Now, I have to say here a few words about the concept of private property. Some believe that land cannot be bought and sold and should not be bought and sold because it is our mother. And this approach resonates very deeply, especially with Russian people. But we live in a world where the concept of private ownership has already had a very long history. So if we want to create a space, why not use, as Anastasia suggested, even the devices of the dark forces, the legal system, to achieve what you want to achieve? In Russia, some people say we will only get ourselves a piece of land when the government passes a law or when the president passes a decree on the allocation of free family domain parcels of land for every willing family, as promised in Book 5. So guess what? Those of the families who decided to purchase a piece of land and proceeded to establishing their family domain, they are already there on the land planting their beautiful gardens and giving birth to their children in the homes that they've built with their own hands. And the ones who do not want to buy into the system, they're still within the system in the large cities waiting for the free allocation of land. Even though the concept of private ownership of land was originally introduced not to safeguard your interests, but to allocate tax payments amongst people. It was really introduced as a form of control over the payment of taxes. Even so, I feel that today it is one of the best mechanisms to assure that land is yours, if not in perpetuity, but for an extended period of time. As we will discuss with you during the course, some of the communities preceded creation of a community and the family domains on leased land. And you know, I think that it harbors a lot of potential problems because leases are finite and there is no assurance you will be able to continue after the 20 or even 49 years of the lease term. So make sure that you use the available legal frameworks to guarantee that you will be able to pass on this piece of land for your onto your descendants. So what also it creates is when you take a piece of land for yourself, you start creating your space of love and you start creating your own territory. And from observing human beings and from the observation of nature, I know that territoriality in nature exists and it is natural. In nature, we have both cooperation and competition. And competition usually emerges when organisms, plants or animals, do not have enough space for themselves, when they're too close together. So they are trying to safeguard their territory and define clear limits to their territory. When you create a space of love, you start defining your territory. And again, it would be very different from this nomadic approach when you have a larger territory and you move around. But I feel it is natural. In nature, and you can observe it even from the example of household pets, they mark their territory. And because it's good to learn from nature, why don't we do the same and mark our territory here? So because we cannot physically do it, otherwise we will really upset those who are in charge of this building, and on Monday there would be a newspaper article on the front page of Byron Bay newspaper saying that 50 followers of Anastasia marked their territory in Byron Bay Community Center. So, but let's follow nature's example, and on the folders that each of you received, why don't you put your first name to make sure that these identically looking folders do not get misplaced. So as I mentioned, in nature, territoriality is natural. You define your territory. And then when you took this piece of land, followed the second step after finding the piece of land, taking the second step, taking 1 hectare of land there forever, you go to step 3, which is planting or building a fence. In some of the Anastasia eco-villages in Russia, they believe that no fences should be allowed, especially no artificial fences, because you need to promote a good community. And if everybody is separated by a fence, there will be less a sense of community. But to me, a fence, a physical barrier, is really a material expression of a non-material spiritual understanding that this is your space. And I found it actually very difficult to start visualizing my domain without having the definite boundary marked on the ground. If you know that just it ends somewhere there in the high grasses, but you do not know even exactly where, it's hard to start creating the mental image of your domain. So this is why a fence is presented as a very important necessity. The other thing that the fence accomplishes, it defines your relationship with the outside world. It tells others that this is your space and you would not want any encroachment on your space. And our eco-village, when I arrived, I put the stakes into the ground and I ran a wire all around my domain. And many neighbors criticized me, explaining that Anastasia really promoted a living fence, a hedge, a permaculture hedge that you plant one time and that it would be, eventually will grow into a living fence which will be maintenance-free and will also be providing you with firewood, etc., etc. So, but in Russian conditions, because of the very short growing season, a tree or a shrub grows only by that much each season. So if you want to have a 2 or 3 meter hedge that will define your territory, it will take 10 or 15 years to grow. So do you wait for 10 or 15 minutes with defining your territory? I think that we really need to use some common sense and apply it to your local conditions, and some provisional, even man-made artificial fence might not hurt because it will define your territory and help you start visualizing the space of your domain. Those of my neighbors who decided not to put a fence, they ran into some problems very quickly. Our eco-village is surrounded by local communities, villages where people have been living for forever, and they were coming to our old field there to pick wild strawberries in the summertime. So a settler wakes up in the mornings, goes out of their log cabin and sees somebody picking strawberries 10 meters away from their home. The question, what are you doing here, is met with a very simple reply: I'm picking strawberries. And when a person tried to explain that it is his space and his domain, the answer of the local villager was, why didn't you build a fence? And I thought, wow, gosh, this person hasn't read the Anastasia material, but they are giving the advice from the books to those who have read the books and for some reason decided that the fence was not necessary. So, you know, it defines your territory, prevents unnecessary encroachment, and promotes your visualization of your space that you will be creating. And once you've defined this territory, and once you've created this physical embodiment of your mental image, you can proceed to building a home, planting a garden, giving birth and raising 2 children if it applies to your situation. You know, it's an all-inclusive approach. In Buddhism, Buddha was saying that every human being, to reach their fullest potential, should plant a tree, build a house, and raise a child. And I find the same ideas presented in the Ringing Cedars series because this is what creates this rich and fulfilling experience and assures that there is this continuity, intergenerational continuity. Unfortunately, I need to reiterate the need for building a home. It's there in the books, but more than one person, after reading about Anastasia's experiences, deemed a home unnecessary in the wet and climatic conditions of Russia, where you have long winters with minus 20 degrees centigrade temperatures. Well, they still felt that because our thoughts are pure and we want to be small Anastasias right away, we really need to follow her example and not construct any insulated or heated shelter. One of my neighbors in our community did not want to build a home. He wanted to live in the open like Anastasia does from day one. When he was asked how he is going to overwinter, and especially during the cold winter nights, he said, "Oh, I'll just drink a glass of vodka and sleep on the snow." Well, this was a very brave approach, but the problem was that this individual had a wife, and a pregnant wife at that, who would probably have trouble drinking a glass of vodka and sleeping on the snow. So because of that, he unwillingly constructed a very poorly insulated shelter out of boards and scrap pieces of metal. There was inadequate insulation and a very primitive wood stove inside. Not only that, but he felt that appliances, even frying pans or cooking pots or dishware, was not necessary because Anastasia doesn't have them. So his wife was forced to make pancakes by pouring the dough onto the hot top of the iron wood stove. Because of these very difficult living conditions, she had a miscarriage very, very late in her pregnancy. And the next season, after the winter was over, she was gone. And this man was very frustrated and, of course, blamed Anastasia for what happened in his family, because he believed that the books contain the promise that when you start creating your space of love, there will be happy families. And he was trying to find Vladimir Megre and request that he takes him to Siberia with him so that he could present his complaints to Anastasia directly. And in our community, when people heard this story and saw this disaster happening right in front of our eyes, somebody told him, "Why don't you build a home? Maybe she will come back." And you know, again, this idea of the need to build a home is right there in the books, but some people neglect it. Another member of a neighboring community, she spent her winter in a very simple, small teepee with a small fire lit in the middle. She survived, but it was a very difficult experience. So people who usually say, "I do not need a home, I want to be like Anastasia," when in the autumn time the colds come, they go back to the cities, to their warm apartments. So really, a well-insulated, well-constructed home for Russian conditions will not hurt. And once you create this home, the structure, the important thing to remember that it really should be a home and not a house. Do you feel the difference? A house is the physical structure, but the home is really the space that you create within this physical structure. This is why the home should be an expression of your inner aspirations as well. And rather than hiring a construction crew that will put it together to a specific floor plan that you might select, you know, even creating the home yourself and planning it out and building it together with your family is already a very important transformative experience. So in a nutshell, these are the 4 basic steps outlined in the books. Find a piece of land that really feels like your home. Take a piece of land there, 1 hectare of land forever. Build a fence or plant a fence, and then proceed to building your home, planting your garden, and raising your family within this space. I thank you for your attention. We will now have a half-hour break, and we'll continue after the break. Thank you. And turning around. And those of you who might be so inclined, a few deep knee bends, like Anastasia told Vladimir Megre to do. Thank you. Yeah. Before we go on and before I show you a couple of short videos from existing Russian eco-villages and then show you a presentation with pictures of the Russian dacha gardens and showing the impact that the Ringing Cedars series has produced in Russia, I wanted to ask whether you had any comments or questions on the previous presentation on the 4 steps towards creating your space of love and establishing your family domain. Yes, please. To make sure that everybody heard the question was, what about having a domain of 100 acres and having a couple of acres as the domain and leaving the rest in a natural ecosystem? For those who prefer seclusion to being part of the community, I think it can really work because people are different and communities are not for everybody. And there are pluses and minuses of having the community, which we will discuss with all of you. But I think that if you and your family like to have more seclusion and be on your own, having a larger piece of land and putting most of it under natural vegetation and having a smaller domain within this larger piece of land would very much accord with Anastasia's vision. And not only that, it would allow you to expand as your family grows. And also, if eventually you would like to have some closer neighbors, probably you would be able, after meeting a family you would like really to see as your neighbor, you would be able already to share some of your land, should you be so inclined. Thank you for your question. The question is about the leased land and starting your family domain on the leased land. You know, many communities, including this one which you are about to see on the screen, you will see how beautiful it is. They started on leased land just because it was the only easy way to procure land. And you know, because children grow up so quickly, I think that starting even on a leased land, even if temporarily, might provide them already better experiences and a better environment than if you wait until you have an opportunity to secure a firm land title. Many of you probably heard about Findhorn community in Scotland. Well, they started on leased land very successfully, and not only that, their lease was a short-term lease. So while ideally you would want to eventually be able to secure the land forever for yourself and for the family, there are very many different approaches to land ownership. Today, there is an increasing number of people, actually, who have inherited large pieces of land and who are land wealthy, and who start sharing it, even without like necessarily you're buying the piece of land from them. I know an example from Hawaii, where I lived for some time. There is a lady who bought a very long time ago, when it was still affordable, a very large piece of property which is now worth millions and millions of American dollars. And she is willing to share it with others and invite other families and other people to come and create a community there. And she's even willing to create a trust structure to own the land and have all legalized and formalized so that people who join the group have assurances that they will stay there permanently and can pass it on to their children if this is their desire. So the whole point of securing the land is making sure that there are assurances you will have it for as long as you want to have it. And whether it's private property or some other arrangement doesn't matter that much. But it's good to have clarity on this point. Just recently I received an email from a friend of mine who lived in an eco community on the Big Island in Hawaii, USA. And you know what? People lived there for over a decade. They created beautiful structures, planted beautiful gardens, and eventually the owner of the land decided to sell everything. And he did. And people were forced to move away from the land that they already started to turn into their home. So you know, if land is communally owned, or if there is a trust or corporation that owns the land, it's good to have clear written agreements as to what can and cannot be done with the land that defines your status being on the land, just because it removes uncertainty and unnecessary disappointment down the road. Thank you for your question. You had a question too? Very good. Yeah, very good comment. And again, you know, this is why it's important not just to follow the Ringing Cedars series to the letter, but to apply it creatively to your particular circumstances and your environment. Well, on 1 hectare of land, you can grow many things and sustain many things in Russia. In Hawaii, you can grow much more than 1 hectare of land in Russia on just a very small piece of land. You might not need as much if you are in a lush tropical climate with a 365-day growing season. If you are further north, or if it is arid, you know, of course, the size of the family domain might justifiably be much larger. So it really has to do with your particular environment, and thank you for bringing it up. I'm sure that a larger size of a domain will be totally justifiable in harsher climates. Thank you for the question. If you read as far as book 6 in the Ringing Cedars series, or actually it's introduced even early in the series, the concept that your ancestors should be buried right there on the ancestral ground of the family domain, so that their bodies, instead of being taken away from the space, can actually physically turn into the vegetation of your family domain and protect it. You know, in my studies for my doctoral degree, when I was doing research, I discovered that in many cultures, there is still to the present day this understanding that your ancestors should be buried in your land, in your what we would call the domain. In Southeast Asia, for example, there is a belief that when ancestors are buried on your land, their spirit goes into the trees and grasses and flowers awaiting their next incarnation within your family. So I think it is very important, and just not because it's written in the books, because it feels right. Imagine a space which not just provides you with all fruit and vegetables that you can eat, but where every tree was planted by your ancestors, and not only that, where the bodies of your ancestors were transformed in the natural living landscape around you. I do not have this for myself, as most families do not have either. But when I imagine such a space for my descendants, it just feels so right that I do think that what Anastasia proposes about the burial of your ancestors on your grounds makes just very important both spiritual and material sense. I heard that there are some stringent regulations here in Australia regarding the burial. It would be up to you to really explore what these regulations are, because sometimes there are ways around them. And sometimes even if you do not follow a specific prescription, the only sanction might be a fine. So it's up to you to decide whether you want to really to follow everything. You know, in Russia, because people lived for 1,000 years under the pressure of laws that were imposed from above and often did not correspond with any reality or any aspirations of the people, Russians have developed a very keen ability to just continue doing their thing no matter what the law says. And I can tell you how Russians would have handled the situation with the burial of their ancestors in their family domain ground if there were a limitation that was requiring the burial in the cemetery. Now, a Russian would get to know very well, over a cup of tea or some stronger drinks, a good and sympathetic funeral director. And when the time comes to bury an ancestor, they would take an empty coffin to the cemetery, bury it there, have the paperwork that it was buried there, have a tombstone there, and during the nighttime, in a normal vehicle, would take the actual body and quietly bury it in their land where they want it. You know, Russians have exactly the same approach with vaccinations. Even though vaccinations are voluntary under the Russian law, some schools or daycare centers are so ignorant that they do require you to vaccinate the child, and you are left with the choice of either fighting it in court or going to a sympathetic physician, paying $10 and having all the paperwork provided to you. So, you know, it's just different approaches to laws. Russians do not take laws too seriously. Very good. You know, I also wanted to make a small comment about the selection of the family domain. In the Ringing Cedars series, you've seen that the process of finding your space was really integrated with the cycles of the family. This is why the creation of the family's domain was preceded by finding your mate in life and then going together to find the place to found your family, if you indeed wanted to start your own and not to stay in the space of your parents' family domain. Why is it important? For the simple reason, because people have different preferences, and the climate and the soil and the landscape, etc., that might work for one partner might not work for the other. And it's good to select the land together to make sure that it is attractive to both and works for both. Otherwise, you're up for very serious challenges. I grew up in central Russia where we have long, cold winters. So I actually enjoy snow. I enjoyed the cold winter and cannot imagine my life without this temperate, cold climate. Well, my wife was born and raised in southern Ukraine that has a much milder climate and milder winters. So guess what? She prefers a warmer climate, and she would readily live in Hawaii or in Australia, I guess, because there is no real winter, and she enjoys that. Now that we are together and we selected the place for our family domain, we did not select the place for our family domain in the process of getting together, right? So it becomes a much greater challenge just because it's difficult to find a piece of land that would have a snow and tropical climate at the same time. So this is why domain is not really only about the natural ecosystem. It's about you and integrating yourself and your family into this landscape, into this soil. Thank you for the comment. Of course, there would be some compromises, but ideally, when you start treating yourself not just an individual, just one separate from your partner, from your family, but really the part of your family, then even your approach and your worldview starts to shift. And instead of saying, oh, I do not feel like home here, and I do not feel like I would stay in this climate forever, if you take your family perspective or your family line, the kin perspective, then your own attitude might drastically change. Because when you look at this land, not through the eyes of you as individual, but seeing yourself as just one link in the very long chain of all your ancestors, the present generations, and all the future descendants, then your perspective may be different, and the compromise with the partner may become easier because you will approach it from the family perspective rather than individual perspective. Yes, please. A very good comment, really. In the Vedic Russian tradition, and from what I've seen from the research, it actually corresponds to the regional worldview of the people of more than 1,000 years ago. There was an understanding of Anastasia, which in the Greek language means resurrection. That means coming back, and like everything in nature comes in cycles: birth, growth, maturity, death, but rebirth the next spring. So the same way the human life was seen as part of this universal cycle, and it was seen as not limited to one lifetime. There was a concept of reincarnation, and not just that, there was an understanding that you do not reincarnate randomly, but if you've created this nurturing space for your family line, then you will have a greater chance of reincarnating right there in this loving space of your family domain, within the same family. And it created an amazing approach to life where you didn't have anybody to blame for the past mistakes. You cannot say, oh, our ancestors screwed everything up and polluted the earth and cut down the trees, because you start realizing that you were the ancestor of yourself in the present lifetime. And then your care for the future generations, as you point out, is not just the care for some abstract people you will never know. In a very direct sense, it becomes care about yourself in your next coming to this earth. And for this reason, it is important to make sure that the place you find is, actually, I need to include it into this list. It feels right where you want to live out your life, have your children live out their lives, and where you would like to come back. So it's a challenge. Again, I don't have a ready-made answer to this, but maybe you will find the place that will appeal to both of you, and that will feel like the place where you would want to be forever. People have different inclinations, though. I noticed that some children do want to continue what their children are doing. In our society, that means, for example, taking over their parents' business. But others would rather go and start creating something on their own. So I think the family domain will be able to accommodate both inclinations. In a very distant future, we might face the situation when there will not be enough land for new children and new families to start establishing their new domains. But nature teaches me that when a particular animal or particular species of any organism reach the carrying capacity of their environment, their reproduction rates drop dramatically on their own. So I think that apart from exploring other worlds and other planets, what will happen when the whole Earth is transformed into this patchwork of beautiful family domains is that people will be satisfied with having 2 children on average to replace the father and the mother, and the Earth population will probably stabilize on the level to allow everybody to have the domains and to have this experience. But meanwhile, you know, because so much land is now has been transformed into a wasteland and is craving for people to touch it with love, I think that the fact that only 2 children can stay in their family domain and the others would have to seek out their new domains, in the point of history where we are now, this looks like a very good situation because it will enable to transform gradually as much of the Earth as possible into the flourishing garden again.